Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Tony Tonkin Show. And this is live. And I need to say, to start with, that Avery isn't here today. So, regrettably, he has another appointment, a health-orientated appointment, I believe. But and he sends his apologies for not being here. And I'm sure it will not be as an exciting visit to the Tony Tonkin Show without Avery here. So let's do what we can. Let's have a conversation. Remember, this is your opportunity to talk about the things that matter to you. So the conversation you have is very, very important indeed. So get involved, have that conversation with me, because today we're talking about two important issues. Thanks, Paul. Good to see you on board, mate. Always good to have you here. Thanks for your email, incidentally, Paul. I really do appreciate it. And thanks for your comments. And I've taken on board some of the things that you suggested, incidentally. So if anybody wishes to contact me, more than happy to do that via email and have a conversation with you about some things that matter to you. I'd be more interested also to hear from you about the things that you want to talk about that are interesting, rather than me selecting things that I think need to be discussed. It will also be important to have those conversations because you want to discuss those particular things. So there's two primary issues that we're going to talk about today. One of them is the Liberal Party's decision to go for net zero. We'll be talking about that at great length. That's the first issue we'll be talking about. That might take some time, and I'll be interested to know your feelings in relation to that. And hi, Sean, good to see you're on board as well. And have a conversation with us about these issues. So there's the Australian issue, which is about the Liberal Party choosing to go net zero. What a pain in the arse that will be. And also we're having a look also at the Jeffrey Epstein case and Trump's involvement in that, and the latest emails that have come out which are implicating Trump and where that places Ghislaine Maxwell in terms of her getting easy treatment in the US simply because she held some secrets to what's happening with regard to Donald Trump and his involvement with girls. So let's see where we go with that. And finally, I'm going to talk, hopefully if I get that far, about the growth, the population growth in Africa and how we ignore Africa in terms of all the things that are happening in Africa. But I was listening to a podcast and the rest is Politics USA today with Alistair and Rory, and it was and they mentioned the explosion in the population. I thought I'd look up those statistics, which I have done, and I'm going to bring them to you as well, because it's a very important part of the world that often seems to be ignored. So we'll be talking about that also. So where does it sit with regard to the Liberal Party going for net zero? Well, who knows? Net zero is just a term. It's two words that mean bugger all to most people. But one of the things I did want to talk about with you is the importance of setting targets and whether targets are relevant in this sort of environment in which we live. Because when I think about targets, I think, when it came to disadvantaged Indigenous people and the targets that we've set with regard to resolving those issues, we've failed as a country miserably. So setting targets doesn't necessarily work. But nevertheless, even though that's the case, it gives us an objective, something we need to work to, something that has some meaning, that says to us, let's do our best to meet that target, even if we miss it. At least we've got a place that we've got to go. We've got a sense of the direction that we need to go. So when it comes to setting targets around net zero, with 2050, for example, was that a reasonable target? Is this something we still should aspire to? What happens if we don't aspire to that target? What happens? What does it mean? And I guess my take on all of that is, it is a target which we probably would not have reached anyway, but is it worthwhile having a target regardless, just like Indigenous disadvantage? It gives us something to work towards. And is it important to work towards those targets? Well, I'm going to produce some statistics and some ideas in a moment which might help us to think a little differently about all of that. So stay tuned while we have that conversation about whether or not we should work towards some of these important targets. But let's go back to the Liberal Party and what they've decided, because the Liberal Party have been pushed against the wall by the Nationals to make a decision about where they stand with regard to renewables and climate change in general. Now, we need to accept the fact that within the Liberal Party there are some climate denials people, that there are some views which is really about, I don't believe in climate change. I don't know where the Nationals sit specifically about this, but there are people like Matt Canavan and particularly the people on Sky News After Dark who will advocate for no target whatsoever because climate change does not exist, according to them. And I wish to disprove that by some statistics for you in just a moment. But where did that place the Liberal Party? The Liberal Party are a little bit confused about where they should sit because they don't want to be out of step with the Nationals, because they simply don't want the split that I believe is probably inevitable between the Liberal Party and the Nationals anyway. So the Liberal parties have done what they could to try and find some sort of position that sits in the middle, whereby they accept renewables are important, and they certainly believe that we could have not just renewables as they're currently being rolled out, but we could have them rolled out somehow differently and somehow better and somehow cheaper than what we're doing right at the moment. Now, no one knows at this particular point what in the hell that looks like. I don't know. I don't think the Liberals know what that looked like. I haven't watched the full conference that occurred, the press conference that occurred with Susan Ley, but she has had one. It has just finished just a little while ago, and I'm not too sure where they came out on that. So I might stand corrected if anybody's watched that and come up with anything that's a little bit different. So let's just see what the news is telling us right at this moment. So Liberal Party formally abandoned net zero by 2050 climate target. Okay, done away with the target. But what does all of this mean? The Liberal Party has agreed to formally abandon its commitment to net zeros by 2050, a day after the majority of members came out to support of scrapping the climate target. So they're doing away with the target. But that doesn't mean that they're doing away with notions around climate change necessarily. They're just doing away with the target. A meeting of Liberal shadow ministers on Thursday, today, decided to repeal Labor's 2030 emissions reduction legislation, but determined to remain in the Paris Agreement and set 5 yearly nationally determined contributions, though only for government. Don't quite know what that means. The party said it would reduce emissions on average year on year in line with comparable countries and as far as technology allows without imposing mandated costs. Now, I'm about to show you in a moment that there were in fact 197 countries who agreed to the Paris Agreement or the Paris Accord, but there are very few countries that have actually met or approaching that target. Now, one of those countries that has done a lot in that area happens to be Norway, I think along with Sweden and Yugoslavia. So the reason why these countries are important to us is that they are small countries. So one of the arguments used against going for net zero or the relevance of our country at all is the fact that we only produce 1% of the emissions. But what I think we should often remember, but often forget, is that there are smaller countries such as Norway and Sweden and others who are working in the direction whereby their degree of renewables has increased considerably. In fact, some of them are up around 90% plus now of renewables. Here in South Australia, we're producing around 90% ourselves, which is a remarkable achievement and which doesn't seem to get the recognition that it deserves. But we're working towards achieving some important progress with regard to our application, our development, and our implication of renewables here in South Australia. But will that be maintained according to the Liberal Party? Well, we do not know. And while the party would not actively survive for net zero, it was agreed that reaching it would be a welcome outcome. So they're trying to get it both ways, I believe. We remain committed to Paris, and we made it very clear it is our policy to set long-term targets, but net zero will be a welcome outcome. So they're not setting a target, but they're hoping and crossing their fingers that perhaps it will happen. Our emissions reduction goals will never come at the expense of Australian families, and this is a principle that will guide every decision we make. So their argument will still be that the way we're rolling out emissions, the way we're rolling out the infrastructure right at the moment, will impose extra costs on the Australian population. So let us know what you think. Someone's put in something there about nuclear, I think I just saw. Is that still a go, do you think? Is nuclear a reasonable option? Shadow Minister Dan Tehan, who has been tasked with steering the party's emissions policy development, said all natural resources, including coal, now this is where they're going to differ from the Labor Party, should be used to push down energy prices while ensuring Australia does its fair share to reduce emissions. That in itself, to me, can be viewed as some form of contradiction, primarily because at the end of the day, coal-fired stations are diminishing. The rebuilding of them is expensive and the type of energy they produce isn't cost effective. So that's the issue that actually sits around that. But they're maintaining that as their policy. So they also go on to say, we want to be throwing all technologies at emissions reduction. So what are those technologies and how are they throwing them? They're throwing them up in the air, hoping they just rest where they can, or are they devising systems whereby they can be used and implemented to the best of their ability? We'll be the only party, or any two parties as a coalition, talking about the Nationals, I don't know whether the Nationals are on board either just at the moment, that is saying to the Australian people, when it comes to energy abundance, we will use all our resources, and when it comes to reducing emissions, we'll also use all of the available technology. So, at the end of the day, it seems to me that they're looking for a bet both ways on all of this. And whether or not the Liberal Party can actually develop, and Liberals and Nationals, develop a cohesive policy that tells people that their policy is faster, just as efficient, and is going to reduce costs, remains to be seen. That is the $3 billion question. And yet they haven't come out with any indication that that is what is going to happen. Because in Australia, this is a real issue. And in this particular article in Sydney Morning Herald, which just came out just a few minutes ago, it says Lee ends by saying she's happy to upset Australia's global partners in pursuit of lower prices. What are those lower prices? That is the question. Obviously, Susan Lee has finished her press conference by saying that if she upsets international partners by pursuing lower household energy prices over lower emissions, she can deal with that. So the trade-off is lower emissions, more pollution, and at the end of the day, a cheaper outcome for consumers. That is what she's arguing. Paris is about a global agreement to bring down temperatures and reduce emissions. That's exactly what we propose to do. No, you're not. I think that's a lie, incidentally. And we will look Australians in the eye and say, this is a plan to bring down emissions and to provide affordable energy for you. There's no evidence at all that that is actually what they're going to do. But nevertheless, at last, hooray, the Liberal Party have arrived at a policy that they believe they can implement. 10 out of 10 to you guys. I don't know whether it's going to be an easy sell. And the reason why I don't know that is because there is a report which by the IEA which counters. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to present some information which tends to, I guess, challenge this view overall. And I think we need to be mindful too of another factor here, that there are so many young people, so many Gen Zs, who see climate change as a threat to their livelihood, threat to their children's lives. So how we overcome that in terms of, I'm trying to think of the right word, instead of settling upon something that they could at least feel comfortable with, we'll wait and see. But at the moment, it's hard to know where the Liberals sit around all of that. So the Liberals want to ditch net zero, but IEA report says it's cheaper and cleaner. So if you're reducing the target, then does that make it any easier around whether it's cheaper or cleaner? The International Energy Agency didn't deliberately time its annual flagship report to coincide with the great climate showdown unfolding in the Liberal Party, but its 2050 energy report, packed with useful data, forecasts, and cold hard facts, has dropped at a most opportune moment for any politician weighing which direction Australia should go. So we need to look at that data. This lengthy report makes three main points relevant to the current debate here in Australia. The first is that the coalition is not alone in wanting to tap the brakes on climate ambition. There is less momentum. This is an important point, I think. Doesn't make it right, but it's an important point. There is less momentum than before behind national and international efforts to reduce emissions, yet climate risks are rising. Donald Trump's moved. Oh, well, yeah, we certainly need to make note of whatever Donald Trump says. Donald Trump moves to pull the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and that's because he's a dickhead. The second point is that energy demand is only growing and will accelerate in the years ahead. This is partly driven by the rise of artificial intelligence and the ballooning number of electricity-hungry data centres. So that's all adding to it. All forms of energy and production reached record highs last year, including nuclear, which is making a comeback. The IEA says global nuclear power capacity is set to increase by at least 1/3 by 2035. And we are out of step with that, mainly because of the cost, mainly because we don't need it, mainly because we have lots of sun and wind. The third powerful point made by IEA will be more difficult reading for those wanting to slow down the net zero transition. For advanced economies, this is worth noting. The World Energy Report clearly finds the following pathway to net zero emissions by 2050 is the best way to deliver lower household bills. So I don't know whether the Liberal Party have gone to the World Energy Report and decided that what they're saying has value, or whether or not they have even noted what they've said. But the bottom line is that one, that for advanced economies, the World Energy Report clearly finds that following a pathway to net zero emissions by 2050 is the best way to deliver lower household bills. Now, the IEA lays out three scenarios: a slow, medium and faster version of the transition away from fossil fuels. The current policy scenario involves sticking with the slower pace witnessed since Trump's return to the White House. The state's policy scenario is based on the best laid policy commitments. Then there's the net zero by 2050 scenario, which, as the name suggests, lays out a more ambitious pathway. So either we ignore it, which is what Trump's doing, try and get rid of it, or at least we abide by some sort of target. Although the net zero scenario requires higher upfront spending, it leads to a clear decline in total household energy bills in advanced economies. That's the path we are taking. And it's important to note as well, electricity may not move much as we use more of it to charge cars and heat homes, but if we use less petrol and gas, overall household bills are forecast to fall. And there's great evidence that we're now buying more EVs and hybrids than before, and clearly that will probably be the case. Indeed, the IEA believes significant savings will be felt within 10 years for advanced economies to stick to the net zero pathway. By 2050, household bills will have roughly halved, exceeding the benefit of any other scenario. So, the information is that there should be a saving over time. It isn't going to happen immediately, and I guess that's the point that has to be sold to many, many people. The reality is that there is not going to be an immediate click of the finger and bingo, prices are going to come down. That is not going to happen. What it does mean, though, is that we need to be steady for the course, which is about setting a target which we could or could not attain, but at least it's a target. So that's the objective here. Now, we need to have a look, though, at actually what is happening. And this is a point. And I guess this is the scary shit that needs to be sold that most politicians will endeavour to avoid. And that is the world warming? When will it warm to a point whereby there will be no return? And the question for me, and some people have stated this also, is have we already reached that point? Which makes you wonder then whether aiming for any sort of solution is, you're heading towards the cliff. The brakes on the car have broken. The steering wheel has collapsed. You're moving straight towards that cliff. You have a couple of alternatives. One is to try and bail out while she's travelling at 100 kilometres an hour and probably kill yourself anyway, or wait until she just goes off the cliff. We're sitting there waiting, I think, for it to just go off the cliff. That's where we're at the moment, because reversing this, given the way most countries are responding around it now, is in itself a worry. And I don't think that the Liberal Party and the National Party understand the issue, because they just want to focus on the fact that we are the 1%. But then if our 1%, as I said before, combines with Norway's, Scandinavian countries, and other countries that are working to diminish their emissions, then we're heading in the right path, because we together can solve this problem. So the world still is on track for catastrophic 2.6% temperature rise, the report finds. So the world is still on track for a catastrophic 2.6 increase in temperature, as countries have not made sufficient strong climate pledges, while emissions from fossil fuels have hit a record high, two major reports have found. Now, what is disturbing about the Liberal Party's attitude towards this and this report is that the Liberal Party are still bent on producing more coal-fired power stations. The result will be more emissions, more damage to the environment, and even though one may argue that it might reduce costs, what is the trade-off? Is the trade-off now that we should sit and wait for renewables to catch up, that we should still build the infrastructure for them, accept the fact that it will be costly, but at the end of the day, we will be better off for it? Or should we just pour more and more emissions into the sky, into the atmosphere, that are going to bring about further heating? Because basically, that is the proposal proposed to you by the Liberal and National Party at the moment. Now, it goes on to say, despite their promises, government's new emission-cutting plans submitted for the COP30 climate talks taking place in Brazil have done little to avert dangerous global heating for the fourth consecutive year, according to the Climate Action Tracker update. The world is now anticipated to heat up by 2.6% above pre-industrial times by the end of the century, the same temperature rise forecast last year. This level of heating easily breaches the threshold set out in the Paris Climate Pact, which every country agreed to, and would set the world spiralling into a catastrophic new era of extreme weather and severe hardships. A separate report found that the fossil fuel emissions driving the climate crisis will rise by 1% this year to hit a record high, but that the rate of rise has more than halved in recent years. The past decade has seen emissions from coal, oil and gas rise by 0.8% a year compared with... So this is some progress. I guess this is what this is saying. At least there is some progress. The acceleration rollout of re-energy is now close to supplying the annual rise in the world's demand for energy, but is yet to surpass it. A world at 2.6 degrees Celsius means global disaster. A world this hot would probably trigger major tipping points that would cause the collapse of key Atlantic Ocean circulation, the loss of coral reefs, that's important of course to us, and the long-term deterioration of ice sheets and the conversion of the Amazon rainforest to a savanna. That all means the end of agriculture in the UK and across Europe, drought and monsoon failures in Asia and Africa, lethal heat and humidity, and this is not a good place to be. You want to stay away from that, he says. And so I guess my point on this subject is that the world is still, even though we have done what we can to reduce emissions, the world is still on track to heat. So we haven't done enough. And the National Party and the Liberals are so hell-bent on listening to the industry, the coal mining, the mining industry lobbyists, that they are determined, more than ever, to spill more pollution into the atmosphere so that the temperature will rise, even if at the end of the day that means a reduced cost to consumers. Now, the question for all of us then is, how quickly would those costs take place? Because coal power stations are failing anyway, and how long would it take to build new power stations? That's another issue. So what do you think about all of this? Someone mentioned wave power. I thought of that the other day. Thanks, Vincent. I thought someone did, or I thought of that the other day, and I thought that was an interesting observation. So wave power is still being, there's thermal, as well. That's also, I think, a possibility. And I think there's lots of, and the other point is there's lots of technologies that could be used that are not fully developed right now, and Australia could be at the forefront of using a lot of those technologies as well. So it's all possible. We're already at 50% renewables, says Paul, which is great. Bring that up. We're already at 50% renewables when the Snowy 2 and other major storage comes in line. Yep, it will be game over because we will be 70 to 80% by then. I don't know whether game over is around 70, 80%. I think game over is more around 90 to 100. But it will be, what's the game over, Paul? Does that mean it's got to be cheaper at that particular point? One certainly would hope so. So let us know what you think. The NLP are cooked. They won't win an election again. Well, not in our lifetime, Paul, perhaps. We need more storage like pumped hydro. I will accept that. That's probably true. And what else have we got? Sorry, folks, expensive apparently. It was experimental. Yep, thanks, guys. You're having a discussion amongst yourselves, which is fair enough also. So I want to turn in the time that I have to another issue. So keep having that conversation. Let us know. Someone's mentioned Gina's party. Yep, that is true. Gina Reinhardt would be chafing at the bit to think that perhaps she's been saved. And she'll be able to send more money to the Liberals and Nationals as a result when she's not meeting up with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. So I haven't got to pivot to this next point, so I'm just going to dive in and kind of see where it is that we're likely to go. Yep. Now, one of the most contentious points in the United States, apart from the shutdown, which has now been resolved because Democrats caved, how pathetic are they, is that Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump. So Jeffrey Epstein apparently, by sending me emails to Ghislaine Maxwell, was having a conversation about Donald Trump's involvement with girls. Now, we all know that Donald Trump used to run beauty pageants, and some of those pageants were for underage kids, and he used to get a kick out of walking in on those pageants and eyeing up and down young girls. It itself is a horrific and pedophilic notion. The fact that he even told somebody on The View once, years ago, that if his daughter wasn't his daughter, he would date her. Donald Trump is a creep. And anyone who thinks differently based on his history is someone who's siding with a potential alleged pedophile. And I find him, as I've mentioned many times, an horrific individual anyway. But there are enough indicators in his history that he is a terrible human being. Now, there's probably apart from someone who's a a psychopathic murderer, there's nobody in my book that is more horrible than someone who abuses a child. It is just the way it is. And I would expect most people to agree with that notion. So to turn your eyes away from, to cast a gaze in a different direction because you think Donald Trump is the next Messiah is stupidity at its best and bloody crazy at its worst. And that Donald Trump himself is the epitome of everything that I disagree with. I find him revolting at every possible level. So where does this sit with regard to Epstein? Now, my view, as insignificant as it might be here in Australia, is that at some point Donald Trump is going to be caught out, that the Teflon Don will not be Teflon anymore. And when I was thinking about this earlier, I was thinking, well, why hasn't all that, wherever they store the tapes, the emails, the videos, whatever they've got on Donald Trump and what Epstein has accumulated over the years, I am curious as to why, wherever that room is, wherever that's stored at the FBI, why it hasn't caught fire. Why hasn't someone found a way to burn all of that stuff? Why has it been kept? Who has kept it? Who's got the key to that room? And you know, I heard someone say recently, well, why haven't those tapes been wiped? Well, mainly because maybe someone recognises that they have within their grasp the power to destroy the President of the United States. And that is why it's still being maintained. And maybe there is also a realisation that Donald Trump is not going to be there forever. And when Trump goes, and he will, whether it's through being defeated in an election, which he should not ever do again, or through some other means, maybe that they'll need that information to justify their stand, if you like, against Donald Trump. So maybe someone's storing it for a rainy day. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And but it is close. I have this feeling that it is much closer than what we think. So the latest news is that Jeffrey Epstein mentioned Donald Trump in several newly released emails. So the other intriguing aspect of this is that they still have these emails. So someone's got them stored somewhere. Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein has been pushed back in the spotlight after several years old emails were released by the US president's opponents. So we don't find Donald Trump releasing these, so the Democrats now have got hold of them. Even though they say opponents, I'm assuming it's the Democrats, it could be somebody else. Because there is a movement within MAGA who are obsessed with pedophiles. Remember the Pizzagate scandal where they were determined to find that Hillary Clinton and other Democrats have been abusing people in a certain pizza place in Washington, only to find out that, and that was in the cellar, only to find out the place didn't have a cellar and it wasn't happening at all. One guy went in with a gun, determined to find this cellar, and it wasn't there. However, MAGA has been obsessed with these issues around pedophilia for a long, long time. And so they are still obsessed. And the reality is it doesn't matter whether it's Donald Trump or a Democrat. The fact that it may be pedophilia is enough for them to abandon anybody, including Donald Trump. So this is Trump's greatest fear, that he might be abandoned by MAGA simply because, well, not simply, but because they find out that he is a pedophile. So the emails were abandoned by a congressional committee, obtained by a congressional committee that has been investigating the Epstein case and how it was handled by authorities. And of course, one has to wonder, why it is that the leader of the House has chosen not to go ahead with any investigations against Trump. Now, this must be because they know that he is involved. And at the end of the day, that means the end of Trump, the end of the Republican Party as they know it. He's already on the nose. He's underwater by heaps of percentage points. So this would make things even worse than what they are right now. And the other important part about this, I think, is that Donald Trump cannot argue his way out of this. He cannot lie his way through this one. He might be able to gaslight people around the economy and other issues, but this he will not be able to gaslight anyone over. Either you were with young girls or you weren't. End of story. And if there's plenty of information in the end to prove that he is, that's the end of Donald Trump. Thank God. So it goes on to say they were published by Democrat members of the committee who say the email suggests that the White House has been hiding the truth about Mr. Trump's relationship with the late convicted sex offender. But Mr. Trump says the move is part of a... Well, of course he does. Everything that he does, farting is a hoax. Everything that Trump does or everything that's held against him is seen as a hoax. Distracted from the massive damage caused by the US government's record-breaking shutdown. And so diversion, let's look somewhere else. There's another shiny object. Let's all just look to that. Now, US politicians moved to end the shutdown, right? Got all that. The first email shows an exchange between Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, his partner and co-offender, who is now in prison for helping him abuse underage girls. I want you to, it goes on to say, Epstein wrote to Maxwell, I want you to realise that dog that hasn't barked is Trump. They redact the victim's name, spent hours at my house with him. He has the victim, whose name has been redacted, spent hours at my house with him. He has never once been mentioned, police chief, etc. I'm 75% there. And Maxwell responds, I've been thinking about that. We don't know who the victim is in this particular case. There has been some assertion that it's Virginia Giuffre, but Virginia in her book didn't mention Trump at all. And one of the interesting aspects of this all for me, this mess that is Trump, is that there are young people out there who are now adults. Sorry, I'll reframe that. There are women out there who were underage at the time they had sex with Donald Trump. And at what point are they ever going to come out and talk about it? And one of the reasons why is that there was one woman who apparently attempted to. And once it was discovered that that was her objective, then she received so many death threats, she withdrew the allegations. Can you imagine being a woman, anybody for that matter, who has experienced something as horrific as being sexually abused by the most powerful man on this planet? And what that must be like to be aware of that fact and know that if you start talking about it, you will be ridiculed, you will be sued. The DOJ, as it sits at the moment, would find a way to lock you up. You may even be killed. It is something that I don't think anybody would ever wish, and it would take a very courageous person to take any action. Virginia Giuffre took that important step, and even she could not bear the strain of surviving through that any longer and took her own life. It is horrible. But the point is that there are many, many women out there who know the truth, not just about Trump, but about other powerful men who have sexually assaulted them and abused them as children. Any of those men who have done that are pedophiles. It is as simple as that. And at some point, I believe, they will all be brought to justice. And we must remember too that if Donald Trump is one of those persons, then the DOJ, whichever is in control, should come after him, because he is not immune from things he did prior to becoming president, only activities while he's president. So let's wait and see. It's an interesting time. As I said before, Teflon Don may not be Teflon Don anymore, because some of this shit's going to come and bite him in the ass. And it will all be over Red Rover, because MAGA will be objecting to it. Let us know what you think on that particular issue. So, Mr. B, that's an interesting one. I'll just read this one out. Whoops. So, right, I don't know, it's the one I had. Trying to find it. Seems the biggest issue for the Justice Department is they won't know what to release, because they don't know what they will get from the estate. Could you? I don't quite know, Mr. Beach, what you mean by that. From what estate? They don't know what information they will get from the estate that will either counter that or agree with it. And I'm assuming you're talking about Epstein's estate there. Trump should be in jail, not the White House, no doubt about that. I think his days are numbered. We will wait and see. And I wanted to finish on another extremely sad note. It'd be really nice, wouldn't it, if we could start talking about things that that are healthy and make us feel good and are positive. But regretfully, we can't, because those things just don't seem to exist. There was many years ago, someone attempted to start a news media whereby they just reported good news, good stories about what people are doing with their lives and how that should be. And I thought it was a great idea, but it failed miserably, because people are not interested in good news stories. And which reminds me, before I get into the next subject, I released a video I did with David, who was an abuse victim of the state, and it came out yesterday, and it's a really important, I think, interview. Not because I've done it, but because it talks to someone who has some really interesting information to offer with regard to surviving sexual abuse, physical abuse, systemic abuse. It's important. So you've got a chance, look up the David interview on my channel and watch it. It's an hour, but David has David's a wonderful, wonderful man, given what he's been through and how he's survived. So look that up. Now, the final thing I wanted to talk about was, while we focus on Trump, while we focus on Europe, Ukraine, and Gaza, while our attention is dragged away to all these other issues, there's other things that are happening in the world that are really important. And one of those is the mess that is Africa. And that it isn't always about the military rule in countries in Africa, the dictatorships. It is a lot about the wars, though, what's happening in Sudan, Nigeria, the Congo, and other places in South Africa. Those things are important, and we should all focus on what's happening in South Africa. And we should all be concerned that the USAID has been cancelled by Trump because he's a clown, dickhead, insensitive, narcissistic psychopath. But apart from all of that, we should be concerned, because these countries need our help, and we should not ignore them. But in us white countries, I'll say that loosely, we do tend to ignore countries of colour. particularly African countries. But we should do that at our peril, except Bob Geldof. I agree. Not all of us, but most of us. The media does in particular. And I just want to highlight something that we should note, because it is filled with disaster and if we don't do anything about it. And that is helping the populations within those countries and providing aid for them, obviously, dealing with Ebola and other diseases that tend to be attracted in those countries, malaria and so forth. And so we need to be able to keep on, because if we don't, those problems find their way into other countries around the world. But one of the things to be noted, I think, is the increase in the population. And that in itself, I'm not suggesting the increase in the population is a bad thing. But what it does mean is that whatever we see as the problems in Africa now will be exemplified, will be increased over time because of the expand in the population. So this graph came out from the UN project that Africa's population would double by 2070. Now that's not very far away. But what is worth noting here, that Asia kind of increases in fat lines just above 5 billion. Europe, Latin America, Europe and North America almost flatline at 1 billion. But the African countries, those countries here, today Africa is home to 1.5 billion people. In 2070, the UN expects there will be over 3 billion people living in Africa. And when you compare that to the other countries highlighted here, that in itself is a concern. So it isn't just about the horrible governments they have and the lack of democracy that sits around Africa generally. It is about explosion in population and what that means in terms of feeding those people, in terms of providing resources within those countries so that those people can learn to live in a respectful, healthy way. They're the issues that I think we don't often focus on enough. So I just wanted to highlight that one to you, to note that we need to focus a lot more on what's happening in Africa because it matters. And it matters to all of us because we're a world community and we should care about each other. Okay, remember that next week I will be away with my wife. We're going to Hobart for a week, and then, but there will be entertained as best as I can. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications, and certainly share my videos with other people because that gets me known, and I really do appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being with me today. Thanks for all your comments. Keep them coming. I really do appreciate it. And Paul did suggest to me in an email that I should let it flow a little bit longer for you to get to the end. Mick says, need more live aid. You're not wrong, mate. It'd be wonderful to have another live aid. You know, the Queen's thing at Live Aid was unbelievable. To have that again, you're right. Good point. Good point. Paul said I should give you some time to let you know when I'm about to finish a session so that you can all say goodbye to each other and all that sort of stuff. So Paul says, hit the button, folks. Thanks very much. And also, if some of you can remember to send me a cup of coffee, that would be good. Appreciate it, everybody. Take care. Look after yourselves.